makes you want to read? Is it your history of reading? You've read something before that you loved and now you want more of the same genre, of the same writer perhaps? Is it that you enjoy perusing bookshelves and making a choice, leafing through pile after pile of books and making that special decision about what you're going to read next? Or are you just someone who picks books based on the cover? Our young students have a very different experience of reading to us. They have less experience in what they like and don't like. They have less proficiency and lower levels of literacy. And finally, they have many competing interests: YouTube, video games, going out with friends, spending time with family. I'm Mr. Hodge, this is English Teaching and Action, and today I'm going to talk to you about hook lessons that will engage your students ready for reading.
When reading a whole class text, I use the Scaffolded Reading Experience Model by Graves and Graves. The Scaffolded Reading Experience Model suggests that the reading process should be broken into 3 distinct sections: pre-reading, during reading, and post-reading. During the pre-reading section, students need to understand how the text relates to their lives. It's a period for encouraging motivation for reading the text, activating any background knowledge they already have that's going to help them understand, and teaching any text-specific knowledge or text-specific vocab and concepts that may be useful in accessing what's going on. It's also a time for pre-questioning, predicting and direction setting, seeing what deductions students can make so they feel invested in the text, and maybe a time to suggest strategies on how to read.
Which leads to today's question: how can we use hook lessons to motivate, engage, and make reading relevant to our students?
For me, a hook lesson is an opportunity to try to grab the imagination of your students, to try to hook them in and engage them with the ideas of the text so they're curious and want to read. Why? Well, hooks and engagements allow opportunity to really build relationships with your students. You know the students in your classroom and you know how to interest and engage them. Student buy-in at the start of a module leads to better overall engagement and therefore better learning. And also, where a text may be slightly drier or more challenging, it can create goodwill so that the students feel that they want to go on that learning experience with you, even if it's a challenging one.
There are many different ways we can engage our students in a hook lesson, but 4 ways that I frequently use are storytelling, asking big questions, emotional response, and making the text relevant to the world around us today. When creating your hook lesson, it's important to think like a reader and not a teacher. Why do you enjoy reading this text? What did you take away from reading it? These are the keys to engaging your student, because you want them to enjoy the same things, to take away those same messages that you loved so much.
As a starting point when planning a hook lesson, I need to really get to grips with the essence of the text that I'm working with. Let's take Romeo and Juliet, for example. How can we relate Romeo and Juliet to ideas of storytelling, big questions, emotional response, and the world around them? Well, first of all, we have the controversial age gap between Romeo and Juliet. Romeo is supposedly 17, whilst Juliet may be 11 or 12. We might draw parallels for our students between a sixth former dating year 7, for example, and see how they react to that, about how shocking the nature of that relationship might be. We might focus on the tragic ending of the text. This is, of course, one of Shakespeare's tragedies, and it's highly emotional. We might think about the theme of rebellion in Romeo and Juliet, which is really relatable for teenagers who often rebel against parents or against authority like school. We might think about a big question such as, are we ever really in control of our destiny? As it relates to every single one of our students and allows us to think deeply about our own perspective on that idea. Or we might relate to something relevant in the modern world, for example, Halsey's new Romeo and Juliet themed album. Students are big fans of Halsey, and they might want to think about why this tale written in the 1500s is still so relevant today that a pop star in 2019 wants to still study and explore this topic. One of my favourite methods of hooking students into a text is through my own storytelling. As adults, we have much more experience of the world than our students, and therefore we have many stories to share. And students love listening to a good story just as much as they do when they're a child. Equally, students want to hear the stories that we have to share as adults who are role models to them, and they often have lots of questions that they want to ask. An example for me would be when teaching The Woman in Black, and I told the students the story of the house I grew up in, which was supposedly haunted. They asked me questions like, what was it like to grow up in a house where there was supposedly a ghost haunting? How did I feel about it? Was I afraid? Did I ever see anything? Did I think they were real? This then became a great opportunity for me to reflect the question back to the students. Have they ever seen ghosts? Have they heard a ghost story? Do they believe in them? And this provided ample opportunity for writing their own thoughts and ideas. Another really engaging method for storytelling is through photography and visual images. For example, for a lesson on Lord of the Flies, I might want to begin with an image like this one of a plane crashed onto an island. It's an opportunity for students to begin to imagine what it would be like to be there. They can create their own stories, perhaps, by describing, by making inferences from the image, or even evaluating. Notice here how I have actually upskilled the students by slowly going through and building up the difficulty and challenge of each question. They then continue to write 50 more words in order to explore what they think is going on here. They create their own story. Another method that Graves and Graves suggested was relating the text to the world around us. Take, for example, A Christmas Carol. A great way to think about how this text is still relevant in 2020 is to think about what's going on in the world around us today. For example, what's happening in the media. I found this Evening Standard headline, "Children in London to receive less than family pets this Christmas, child poverty charity figures reveal." I might give them the article to read and see what they think about it. I might give them a charity poster that explores the topic. And then I want students to think about how this alters their own understanding of what Christmas is by relating it to their own Christmas, or perhaps then getting them to imagine what Christmas would be like for these other children. By looking at how the world around us still carries the same themes as the text itself, students will become more invested and understand why it's still important today. Some concepts are more challenging to directly relate to our students, but one great method could be a hypothetical question. For example, when teaching Great Expectations, I considered the key moments in the text where Pip receives a huge amount of money. And I wondered for my students, what would they do tonight if they found £1 million waiting for them at home? It's a big question. It's an exciting question. It's something that's unlikely to happen to them, and therefore it builds their curiosity and imagination. They might think about what they do with the money, how they'd feel about finding it. Would they ask questions? How would their life change? They then have time to write. And notice that after all of these activities, there's always opportunities for discussion, because what we want to build here is a reading community where everyone shares their ideas and wants to offer their own thoughts. My final method of engaging students is through emotional response. Thinking about what would move them, what would make them feel something. Students often have very strong opinions, and a debate might be a great opportunity for them to express some of these ideas. Take Of Mice and Men. The key question for me within that text are ideas surrounding dreams and destiny. Are we really in control of our lives? Are our dreams really achievable? Here, by providing students with a statement that explores that nature, students had time to really think deeply about something relevant to them. Were they in control? Could they achieve their dreams? And by offering the 5 different options of strongly agree, neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree, students were able to really formulate ideas and then have a good debate afterwards, which began to really make us think about one of the key themes of the text. These activities so far might make a really nice introduction to a lesson, small starter activities that are going to really begin to get discussion flowing. But what about a main activity that will really engage our students and get them to buy into the text? How can I create a longer activity that uses storytelling, big ideas, emotional response and relevancy to the world around them to make something memorable and meaningful? So far, we have considered a range of starter-style activities that might begin to engage our students and hook our students into the text. But how can we create something longer, more meaningful, memorable, that will really allow our students to hook into what this text is really about. Let's look at an Inspector Calls as an example. An Inspector Calls is a text that could be described as a whodunit, because the central mystery of who murdered Ava Smith is an intriguing one. Here, the department I was working in had created a murder mystery where a body had been found by the police with the contents of a handbag next to it. And it was up to the students to use the clues that we had created, whether they be letters, images, bills, in order to work out who had committed the crime. They needed to work out the identity of the dead person and the series of events that took place to cause the death. In order to really maximise and maintain their interest in the text, at the end of the lesson, students wrote for 10 minutes about who they thought Betty X was, and then they put them into envelopes that they stored away until after the reading of the text. When we finished the text, students were excited to open the envelopes and see if anyone had closely formulated or deduced who the criminal really was. This task works so well and is used so widely by teachers because students love the guessing process, but actually are also reading, are making deductions, are thinking about genre whilst completing this activity.